final set of entrepreneurs for this Entrepreneur Spotlight for today's, Rebecca Brachman and Lynn from the Social Outcomes Initiative.
Right, we'll see if this works. Hello again. I feel like Jeff sort of set precedent that I can kind of stand here and wave my arms a bunch, so I'm going to do that. I know it's kind of getting to that time right after lunch, so I'm trying to bring the energy up. All right, so I'm going to talk to you about the Social Outcomes Initiative that we have been working on. Those of you who were at the Stanford conference last year or know me know that about 5 years ago, I accidentally discovered the first drugs that might prevent PTSD and depression. And so very, very quickly, if you weren't there, all of our existing treatments in psychiatry only suppress symptoms. We have no cures, and we have no preventatives. And if we had something we could give prior to stress, the way vaccines work now in infectious disease, it would obviate the need for treatment. So this was an accidental discovery. And in addition to that, we had the windfall that one of the compounds we discovered that has this effect was also a generic drug that was already FDA approved since the 1960s. And that should be great. It means it had half a century of safety data. And so we should be able to develop that faster and more cheaply. And this whole concept actually has a name, right? It's known as generic drug repurposing. And that's taking an FDA-approved drug that has gone off patent and developing it for a new use. And it has several advantages over traditional drug development. Namely, traditional drug development is extremely expensive. It can be over $1 billion these days for a single drug. It takes usually a decade, maybe more, and only 1 in 10,000 compounds actually make it to market from start to finish. Whereas generic repurposing is 100 times less expensive. It usually only takes about 3 to 5 years, and it's 2,000 times more likely to succeed. And that's due to 2 things. 1, it has established safety already. So most compounds fail in safety trials for the FDA. And 2, because of biological redundancy. So a lot of the disease mechanisms in one disease are actually conserved to other diseases. So a drug that actually is effective in one disease is more likely than anything new we come up with to be effective for another disease. Unfortunately, there's another part of this that has a name. It is the problem of repurposing, because it turns out that generic repurposing is very, very difficult to do due to failure of incentives. So right, you know it's an intractable problem when it has a name that says the problem of, and there are academics that have dedicated their entire careers to studying this problem, including Ben Royne here at MIT. And specifically, in the rest of the market, a method of use patent is usually enough for you to stake out exclusivity for your product. But in pharma, with drugs, doctors can prescribe any drug that's been FDA approved for any indication, or what's known as off-label prescribing. And that's great, we don't want to get rid of it, but it creates a very niche incentive failure in that there's no way to capture revenue if you develop a generic drug for new indication, because you don't have market exclusivity. So it very rarely happens, and when it does, it's usually driven just by government or nonprofit on one-offs. So I was left with 2 choices. One is what you normally do in academia and pharma when you find a drug that's already off patent for new use, which is you spend a bunch of time looking for a novel compound that you can then patent protect and have composition of matter and then take it through FDA approval. But this is a whole new class of drugs, right? It's not a new target. We don't know the mechanism. So we'd be looking at 10 to 15 years, best case scenario for a new compound. But it could be 50 years, it could be indefinite. We may not find that target for God only knows how long. And then the alternative possibility was try and figure out a way to solve this class of incentive problems. And ironically, it probably tells you something about the state of drug development, that ended up being more tractable. So it took about 3 years, but we developed a novel social finance mechanism to incentivize and enable generic drug repurposing. And I'm not going to go into the mechanism very much here because we don't have time. Some of it's proprietary, but if you come to our table, we can go in depth, right? There's just a teaser. But top line, it's based on share in savings. So it's not value-based payment, but it's kind of a little bit further on the spectrum, that if you can create healthcare savings and capture some of that by contract, with the savers, the payers, that can actually be revenue. And what this does, in addition, for the first time, is it actually aligns the incentives of both the investors, the payers, the drug developers, and the patients, because everyone wants the best improvement in health, the largest social impact, because it's not a double bottom line, it's a single bottom line. And this makes drug repurposing not only possible, but sustainable and lucrative. I'll hand it off to you, Lynn.
Thanks. So the opportunities presented by generic drug repurposing and by the financial solution that Rebecca invented beg the question, what if the cures to the world's diseases are sitting in our medicine cabinets right now, and we just didn't know it? I'm going to let that sink in for a second. So here we have some examples of drugs that we are already working on in partnership with academia. We have PTSD and depression, which is Rebecca's research, Alzheimer's, which is a really hot topic here today, and traumatic brain injury. One of our researchers, actually, Johnny Seaback in the back there, is spearheading that effort. I want to direct your attention specifically to the very far right column. Those are US healthcare savings over the next several years if we're able to repurpose generic drugs for these indications. That's just to show you the scale of these savings and the fact that this is absolutely a sustainable financial mechanism. Honestly, the key takeaway here is that the Social Outcomes Initiative is the first in its class to combine generic drug repurposing with novel share and savings financial solutions. And we do this to sustainably affect social change and improve public health. We've been incredibly lucky to have the support of the BrainMind community. We have people here that work on this very regularly, Calvin Nguyen, Daniel Clausen, Dave Morin. We've gotten the invaluable advice of people like Jeff Ling and Tom Khalil. And now we're turning to you to help us answer this question. What potential partners or novel ideas could help us maximize our impact? We're going to be funding this in the next year, and on top of that, we're looking for additional indications or use cases for which a share and savings mechanism is applicable. So we're really looking forward to discussing more at our breakout session, and thank you for your time.